What would it take to defeat a book? Not to burn it, not to ban it, not to prevent people from reading it. What would it take to answer it? More than 14 centuries ago, the Quran presented its opponents with a challenge. If they believed that this revelation had been invented by a human being, they were invited to produce something comparable. They could work together. They could call their strongest writers. They could seek every form of assistance available to them. And the Quran declared that they would not succeed. Humanity did respond. Some claimed that they could produce something similar whenever they wished. Others called the Quran poetry, magic, ancient stories, or ordinary human speech. But a claim of victory is not the same as a winning performance. So did humanity ever answer the challenge? And perhaps the more difficult question is this: what would a real answer even look like? Welcome to the Guided Hour, where every journey carries a story and every story carries guidance. Today, we journey through the Quran's open challenge to humanity and ask whether humanity ever won. To understand the challenge, we must begin by removing several ideas that the Quran itself does not say. The challenge is not simply, write something beautiful. It is not, create a paragraph that rhymes. It is not, use old Arabic words. It is not, make something that sounds religious. And it is not a competition where the shortest text with the most repeated sounds receives the highest score. The actual language is more demanding and at the same time less mechanically defined. In one passage, the Quran addresses those who are in doubt about what was revealed to the servant of Allah. It invites them to produce one surah like it and to call their supporters besides Allah if they are truthful. The next ayah does not merely predict difficulty, it states that they will never do it. Elsewhere, those who claim that Prophet Muhammad fabricated the Quran are challenged to bring 10 fabricated surahs like it and to call upon anyone they can for help. Another passage challenges them to bring one surah. Another declares that if all humanity and the jinn joined together and supported one another, they would still not produce the equivalent of the Quran. And another says that those who claim it was invented should produce discourse like it if their accusation is true. Notice what is happening. The Quran is not asking its opponents to accept its conclusion before entering the discussion. It begins with their conclusion. Suppose, for the purpose of the argument, that Prophet Muhammad invented it. Suppose it is human speech. Suppose its source is no higher than the human mind. Then human beings should be able to reproduce something comparable. Not necessarily alone, not necessarily without preparation, not necessarily without assistance. The challengers may gather supporters, they may combine abilities, they may seek witnesses, they may bring anyone they can. The Quran removes the excuse of isolation. The question is not whether one ordinary person can improvise something in a few minutes. The challenge permits cooperation, it permits planning, it permits expertise, it even expands the imagined team beyond humanity when it mentions the jinn. The claim is enormous. But before asking whether anyone won, we must ask whether anyone accepted. The Quran itself records one revealing response. When its ayahs were recited, some opponents said that they had already heard such things. They claimed that if they wished, they could say something similar. Then they dismissed the revelation as stories of earlier people. That statement matters. They did not merely say, "We dislike this." They claimed ability. They said, in effect, "We could do this if we chose." It is one of the oldest human defenses against a challenge. A person sees an achievement, feels threatened by it, and says, "I could do that, perhaps." But the unanswered question remains, where is the work? A person may stand before a painting and say, "I could paint something better." A person may hear a difficult composition and say, "I could create that." A person may criticize a building and say, "I could design something stronger." The statement may be true. It may also be an attempt to protect the ego from admitting that another achievement is beyond one's present ability. The only way to move beyond the claim is to produce the result. The Quran records accusations against it. It was called fabricated speech. It was described as poetry. It was associated with fortune-telling. It was dismissed as magic inherited from earlier people. It was called the speech of a human being. But an accusation explains nothing unless it accounts for the thing being accused. Calling the Quran poetry does not explain why it does not behave like the established poetry of its environment. Calling it ordinary speech does not explain why it affected listeners differently from ordinary speech. Calling it magic is not an analysis of language. Calling it inherited stories does not explain its composition, argument, voice, law, worship, narrative, warning, consolation, and moral reasoning. A label can end a conversation inside a person's mind. It cannot establish the truth of the label. This human weakness is not limited to 7th century Makkah. It appears whenever people replace examination with classification. A person encounters an argument and calls it propaganda without investigating whether its claims are true. Another encounters religious belief and calls it superstition without studying what is actually believed. Another encounters criticism and calls it hatred because responding to the criticism would be uncomfortable. Another calls every unfamiliar idea misinformation before checking the evidence. Labels can sometimes be accurate, but a label is a conclusion, not a substitute for reasoning. The Quran's challenge moves the discussion away from labels and toward demonstration. Do they say he fabricated it? Then bring something comparable. Do they say it is human speech? Then let human beings reproduce its equal. Do they believe its source is limited to one man? Then gather many people and overcome it. The challenge does not ask for silence. It asks for evidence. At this point, a popular explanation is often presented. People say that the Quran first challenged humanity to reproduce the entire book, then reduced the challenge to 10 surahs, and finally reduced it to 1. That presentation is memorable. But accuracy requires caution. The Quran certainly presents challenges at these different scales. It mentions the equivalent of the Quran, 10 surahs, 1 surah, and comparable discourse. What should not be asserted carelessly is that every passage formed a simple chronological sequence in precisely that order unless the chronology has been reliably established. The argument does not depend on that simplification. The power of the challenge remains whether the passages are described as stages, different formulations for different contexts, or multiple expressions of the same fundamental demand. The smallest explicit unit is 1 surah. That includes short surahs as well as long ones. This makes the challenge appear accessible. A person is not required to produce hundreds of pages. 1 surah is enough. Yet this apparent simplicity creates the deepest question. What does it mean to produce 1 surah like it? Imagine someone writing a few lines that end with similar sounds. Has the challenge been answered? Imagine another person copying phrases from the Quran, changing several nouns, and arranging them into a new passage. Has the challenge been answered? Imagine a skilled writer composing a powerful Arabic prayer. Has the challenge been answered? Imagine an artificial intelligence system studying the Quran's vocabulary and generating sentences with familiar cadence. Has the challenge been answered? The answer depends on what "like it" means, and the Quran does not provide a spreadsheet. It does not say that 30% of the score comes from rhyme, 20% from grammar, 20% from emotional effect, and 30% from theological meaning. There is no numerical threshold. This is where serious discussion must replace slogans. Muslim scholars developed an extensive field around the inimitability of the Quran. They examined what made its discourse impossible, in their judgment, to equal. They did not all describe that quality in exactly the same way. Some emphasized linguistic composition. Some emphasized rhetorical order. Some focused on the relationship between words and meanings. Some emphasized the knowledge contained within the revelation. Some discussed its moral, legal, prophetic, or transformative dimensions. Some treated its inimitability as a total quality that could not be reduced to one isolated feature. A minority historical theory proposed that people might otherwise have been capable of producing something comparable, but Allah prevented them from doing so. The more widely accepted approach located the inability in the qualities of the Quran itself. This disagreement is important. It tells us that the phrase, "the Quran is inimitable," did not end intellectual investigation. It began it. Scholars asked how language produces meaning. They asked whether beauty belongs to individual words or to their arrangement. They examined how grammar, sequence, omission, emphasis, sound, imagery, and context work together. They asked why two statements containing similar vocabulary can have very different force. Consider a simple example from ordinary language. A person may say, "The city became quiet." Another may say, "By morning, even the doors seemed afraid to move." Both communicate silence, but they do not create the same experience. The second sentence gives silence an image. It changes the relationship between the listener and the scene. Now imagine that this relationship extends beyond one sentence. A text may shift between narrative and law, warning and mercy, history and direct address, description and question, cosmic scale and private conscience. The transitions may appear sudden to a reader unfamiliar with its structure, yet they may be connected through repeated themes, sounds, contrasts, or changes in audience. A surah may begin with an oath, move into the collapse of worldly certainty, turn toward human ingratitude, recall an earlier nation, address the listener directly, and end with a command or final image. Matching a few sentence endings would not reproduce that architecture. Copying vocabulary would not reproduce the movement. Producing an emotional paragraph would not reproduce the union of sound, meaning, theology, argument, and guidance. This is why surface resemblance is not necessarily equivalence. A child can imitate the visible shape of a famous building with blocks. That does not mean the child has reproduced its engineering. A computer can apply the colors associated with a famous painter. That does not mean the result possesses the original's composition, intention, historical significance, or mastery. A musician can repeat the rhythm of another composition. That does not establish equality in melody, structure, emotional movement, and technical control. Imitation often begins by identifying the easiest feature to copy. Equivalence requires accounting for the whole achievement. The Quran's shortest surahs make this especially interesting. Their brevity does not make them empty. A short text has less space in which to establish identity, movement, meaning, sound, and conclusion. Every word carries greater pressure. Remove one element and the structure may change. Add an unnecessary phrase and the balance may weaken. This is not unique to scripture. A short poem can be harder to perfect than a long speech because it has nowhere to hide excess. A legal definition can be harder to write than an essay because every word may change its application. A memorable slogan can take days to create, even though it takes seconds to repeat. Length and difficulty are not the same. The challenge to produce one surah cannot therefore be reduced to producing the same number of words. Nor can it be answered by producing a sentence that a group of supporters personally enjoys. The Quran invites challengers to bring their helpers and witnesses, but that does not mean a person may write something and appoint only committed supporters as judges. Self-declared victory proves little. A Muslim could announce that every attempted imitation has failed without reading it. A critic could announce that an imitation has succeeded without understanding classical Arabic. Neither response would be intellectually serious. A meaningful evaluation requires competence. The evaluator would need to understand the language of the Quran at a level beyond conversational familiarity. The evaluator would need to distinguish different forms of Arabic discourse. The evaluator would need to examine more than rhyme. The evaluator would need to identify borrowed expressions. The evaluator would need to compare syntactic organization, meaning, rhetorical movement, imagery, semantic precision, and total effect. The evaluator would also need to declare the criteria before reaching the conclusion. Even then, disagreement could remain. Literary judgment contains an element of trained human evaluation. People may agree that a sentence is grammatical while disagreeing about whether it is profound. They may count repeated sounds but disagree about whether those sounds strengthen meaning. They may identify a metaphor but disagree about whether it succeeds. They may recognize technical control yet disagree about spiritual force. This leads to one of the strongest objections to the challenge. A critic may say, the test cannot be failed by the Quran because believers will reject every submission. The test cannot be passed because the judge has already chosen the winner. That objection deserves a real answer. The weak response would be to become angry. The weak response would be to accuse every questioner of dishonesty. The weak response would be to pretend that no problem exists. The stronger response begins with an admission. There is no global institution recognized by every Muslim, every Arabic linguist, every literary critic, every secular scholar, and every religious skeptic as the final judge of the Quranic challenge. There is no machine that receives two passages and displays a percentage of divine equivalence. The challenge is not a chemistry experiment. It cannot be presented honestly as though a laboratory has measured the Quran and recorded 100% miracle on an instrument. But that admission does not make the challenge meaningless. Many important human judgments are not settled by a single machine. Courts examine testimony, documents, motives, probabilities, and competing explanations. Historians compare sources, contexts, transmission, and material evidence. Literary scholars examine language, structure, genre, influence, and meaning. Doctors combine measurements with trained interpretation. Engineers use numerical tests, but they also judge design decisions within conditions that cannot be captured by one number. The absence of one universal score does not eliminate rational evaluation. It means the evaluation must be transparent. What criteria are being used? Who possesses the relevant knowledge? What is being compared? Has the challenger reproduced a surface feature or the full combination? Is the evaluation independent, or has the conclusion been chosen in advance? These questions apply to both believers and critics. A believer should not fear them. Truth does not become weaker when exaggeration is removed. If this episode is helping you see these questions with greater clarity, take a moment to like this episode, subscribe to the Guided Hour, and share it with someone who may benefit. Your support helps more families discover thoughtful and reliable Islamic storytelling. Now, let us return to the challenge. One of the difficulties facing an English-speaking listener is translation. The challenge concerns the Quran. The Quran is in Arabic. An English translation communicates meanings selected and expressed by a translator. It can be accurate, careful, beautiful, and deeply beneficial, but it is not identical to the original discourse. A translator must constantly choose. One Arabic expression may carry several connected meanings. English may require selecting one. A word may echo another word earlier in the Surah. The English equivalents may not echo. A sentence may permit more than one grammatical relationship. The translator may need to commit to one. A passage may create rhythm through consonants, vowel length, pauses, repetition, or shifts in grammatical form. Those effects may disappear or transform in English. A compact phrase may require a longer English explanation. A gendered or plural construction may carry implications that do not transfer neatly. This does not mean translation is useless. It means an English reader should be humble when making claims about the literary structure of an Arabic text. A person who has only read a translation may understand many teachings of the Quran. That person may be moved by its message. That person may recognize its moral seriousness and narrative power. But evaluating whether an Arabic imitation equals the Arabic Quran requires knowledge beyond reading the English meaning. This limitation applies in both directions. An English-speaking Muslim should not claim expertise merely because the conclusion supports faith. An English-speaking critic should not declare the challenge defeated merely because two translated passages appear similar. Language matters. Yet the challenge may not be only linguistic. This is another area requiring precision. Some presentations attach every impressive fact associated with the Quran to the challenge. They speak about science, history, numerical patterns, legal systems, predictions, preservation, memorization, personal transformation, and civilization. Some of these subjects deserve independent examination. But combining every possible argument can make the original challenge less clear. The explicit language asks for something like the Quran, 10 surahs like it, 1 surah like it, or comparable discourse. Classical scholars explored several dimensions of this likeness. The safest conclusion is that the challenge concerns the Quran as discourse, not merely one detachable statistic. Its language carries meaning. Its meaning appears through language. Its warnings are shaped through address. Its narratives are arranged for guidance rather than only chronology. Its laws appear within a moral and theological vision. Its descriptions of creation direct the listener toward responsibility. Its questions do not merely request information, they confront assumptions. Its repetition is not always simple duplication. A repeated event may appear with different details because the surrounding guidance is different. Its voice may turn from describing people to addressing them. It may speak about history and suddenly make the listener feel observed. This total interaction is difficult to imitate because each element affects the others. Change the wording and the sound changes. Change the sequence and the emphasis changes. Change the image and the theological implication may change. Add detail to make a narrative more complete as history, and its moral focus may weaken. Remove repetition to satisfy modern expectations, and the relationship between passages may disappear. Make every transition explicit, and the urgency may become an essay rather than revelation. The Quran does not simply place information into sentences. It directs attention. That is one of the most important insights for understanding why the challenge matters. Consider the difference between information and guidance. Information may tell you that a powerful nation once collapsed. Guidance asks why power made its people unable to recognize truth. Information may tell you that a person possessed wealth. Guidance asks what wealth did to the person's sense of dependence. Information may tell you that people rejected a messenger. Guidance reveals the excuses, social pressures, pride, fear, and interests operating within that rejection. Information may describe the end of a life. Guidance asks what the person prepared before the end arrived. The Quran repeatedly turns events into mirrors. The reader is not allowed to remain safely outside the account. A story about arrogance becomes a question about the reader's arrogance. A warning to an earlier nation becomes a warning against repeating its choices. A description of mercy becomes an invitation to return. A discussion of evidence becomes a test of whether the reader actually wants evidence. This is why the challenge is not merely an ancient contest between writers. The challenge exposes the motives of the evaluator. What would make a person admit that the Quran had not been equaled? What would make another person admit that a proposed imitation deserved serious study? Could either side recognize evidence against its preferred conclusion? A test of language can become a test of character. This does not mean every critic is arrogant. It does not mean every believer is sincere. A person may reject Islam after serious study. Another may identify as Muslim while rarely examining the Quran. The issue is not the label a person carries. The issue is intellectual honesty. Do we investigate before dismissing? Do we distinguish what we know from what we assume? Do we admit when an argument is weaker than we previously believed? Do we avoid making claims that our evidence cannot support? Do we change our position when the evidence changes? The Quran's original opponents were not portrayed as people without intelligence. Many understood the power of language. Some recognized that the Quran did not fit comfortably into the labels they used against it. Yet recognition alone does not guarantee submission. A person can understand an argument and resist its consequence. A leader may recognize truth, but fear losing status. A merchant may recognize justice, but fear losing profit. A family may recognize wrongdoing, but fear public embarrassment. A community may recognize evidence, but fear what admission would require. The question, "Is this true?" is often followed by another, quieter question: "What will happen to me if it is true?" This is where the Quranic challenge becomes more than literature. If the Quran is human speech, then it can be studied as an extraordinary human composition without accepting its authority as revelation. But if it is from Allah, then the listener is not merely evaluating a book. The listener is being addressed. That possibility changes the emotional weight of the investigation. It explains why people may search for the weakest version of the argument and dismiss the entire subject. It also explains why believers may become defensive when difficult questions are asked. Both reactions can be forms of fear. The better path is disciplined courage. Examine the verses, study the language, consult those who possess knowledge, read critics carefully, read responses carefully. Do not accept a viral claim because it supports your identity. Do not reject a serious argument because it threatens your identity. And do not pretend certainty where you possess only confidence. What then about historical attempts? Writings have been presented at different times as imitations, parodies, alternatives, or supposed answers to the Quran. A complete history of every text claimed as an answer would require its own episode. Some reported examples come through polemical literature where exact wording, attribution, or historical circumstances may be uncertain. We should not build a case on stories that cannot be confirmed. The most responsible conclusion is narrower. Muslim scholarship has not recognized a successful answer to the challenge. The Quran retained its position as the central standard of sacred Arabic discourse within Islamic civilization. Works on rhetoric, grammar, interpretation, and literary theory developed partly through attempts to understand its expression. That historical influence is real, but influence alone does not prove divine origin. A book may influence civilization without being revelation. Popularity alone does not establish truth. The number of people who memorize a text does not, by itself, establish that no human could produce it. The endurance of a book does not automatically prove every claim made for it. These facts may contribute to a larger argument. They should not be substituted for the challenge itself. The question remains comparative. Has anyone produced an accepted equivalent? Here the word accepted needs examination. Accepted by whom? A small group can accept almost anything. An author's supporters can praise a work. An opponent can organize a panel already committed to declaring victory. A religious community can refuse examination before reading. None of these outcomes settles the question. A stronger claimed victory would require something more substantial. The proposed text would need to be original rather than assembled from altered Quranic phrases. It would need to operate in relevant Arabic discourse rather than rely on the limitations of translation. It would need to be examined by highly competent readers. It would need to demonstrate more than repeated endings or familiar vocabulary. Its defenders would need to state the criteria by which it equals the Quran. Those criteria would need to be applied consistently to both texts. The evaluation would need to consider structure, meaning, rhetorical force, language, coherence, and the relationship between these features. Even after such an evaluation, universal agreement might not follow. But at least the submission would rise above self-declared imitation. To date, No response has established a universally recognized victory under mutually accepted criteria. That sentence is carefully worded. It does not say that nobody has written an imitation. It does not say that no critic has declared success. It does not say that every Arabic speaker agrees on every literary judgment. It says that no claimed answer has settled the challenge under a standard accepted by the parties involved. For Islamic theology, the conclusion is stronger. The Quran says humanity and the jinn will not produce its equal. A Muslim accepts that declaration as true. The challenge remains unanswered because the revelation states that it cannot be met, and because Muslim scholarship has not recognized any text as its equivalent. A person outside Islam may respond that this reasoning begins with belief in the Quran. That is partly correct. The theological conclusion operates within a worldview in which the Quran is revelation. But the challenge is also presented as evidence supporting that worldview. This creates a circle only if the argument is presented carelessly. The careful argument is cumulative. A person does not have to begin by assuming every claim is true. The person may examine the historical prophet Muhammad. The person may examine the Quran's language, worldview, internal relationships, transmission, claims, moral vision, and historical setting. The person may compare explanations. Was it deliberate fabrication? Was it poetry? Was it the speech of a fortune teller? Was it borrowed material reorganized by one human mind? Was it collective production? Was it an extraordinary work of religious genius? Was it revelation? The challenge presses on the adequacy of each explanation. If it is ordinary human production, why has an equivalent not been established? If it is copied, what source accounts for its distinctive composition? If it is poetry, why does it resist classification as the established poetry surrounding it? If it is merely beautiful language, why does the discourse combine beauty with sustained theological, ethical, legal, narrative, and devotional functions? These questions do not force belief like a mathematical equation. They invite inference. People regularly reason toward the best explanation without possessing absolute measurement. The question is whether revelation provides a better explanation than the alternatives. A Muslim says yes. A critic may say no. The discussion should then move to evidence, not insults. Now consider the most modern version of the challenge. Artificial intelligence can generate text in seconds. A system can study enormous collections of writing. It can identify patterns in vocabulary, grammar, rhythm, and sequence. It can produce passages resembling many authors and genres. Could artificial intelligence produce a surah like the Quran? It could certainly produce superficial imitation. It could use Quranic vocabulary. It could imitate repeated endings. It could generate warnings, descriptions of creation, moral instructions, and statements about judgment. It could combine these features into Arabic text, but generation alone does not answer the challenge. The model may have been trained on the Quran, commentaries, translations, imitations, and discussions of its language. Its output may therefore be recombination rather than an independent equivalent. More importantly, speed does not determine quality. A calculator performs arithmetic faster than a human being, but speed does not make every number meaningful. A system can generate thousands of paintings, but volume does not establish that one equals a masterpiece. A language model can produce confident errors as easily as elegant sentences. The question remains the same. What has been produced? By what criteria is it equal? Does it merely sound familiar for a few lines? Does it contain coherent meaning? Does every phrase contribute? Does it maintain grammatical and rhetorical integrity? Does it possess independent identity, or is it recognizable mainly because it borrows the Quran's surface? Can it withstand sustained examination, and who is qualified to judge it? Artificial intelligence does not remove the evaluation problem. It multiplies the number of submissions. It may become a powerful instrument for linguistic analysis. It may help researchers examine patterns, structures, vocabulary, and relationships. But a model cannot settle a theological question merely by generating text that resembles its training material. Nor should Muslims respond by saying that machines are incapable of producing anything impressive. They are capable of producing impressive language. That fact should be admitted. The real issue is equivalence, not surprise. A person hearing an artificial passage may initially believe it sounds Quranic. After closer examination, the structure may collapse. Another passage may remain linguistically strong, but depend heavily on recognizable borrowing. Another may be original, but lack the density, movement, or meaning associated with the Quran. Another may impress some experts and not others. Each claim must be examined rather than dismissed in advance. Confidence does not require fear of testing. So did humanity win? Within the Quran's own claim, the answer is no. Within mainstream Islamic belief, the answer is no. Within the history of Muslim scholarship, no text has been accepted as an equal to the Quran. Under a universally accepted secular measurement, the question has not been settled because no universally accepted measurement exists. That does not mean humanity won. It means humanity has not established a verified victory under criteria accepted by both challenger and respondent. A critic may reject the challenge as insufficiently measurable. That is not the same as producing the requested equivalent. A person may reject a competition's rules. That person has challenged the competition. The person has not necessarily won it. Another critic may argue that literary superiority can never prove divine origin. That objection also deserves care. Beauty alone does not prove revelation. A beautiful human poem remains human. The Islamic argument is not supposed to be that every beautiful sentence is divine. The argument concerns the specific character of the Quran, its discourse, its emergence through Prophet Muhammad, its sustained qualities, its claims, and the inability of competing explanations to account for the whole. The challenge belongs within that larger case. It should not be isolated as a magic sentence that eliminates every question, nor should it be dismissed because it does not operate like a physics experiment. It is a literary, historical, rational, and theological challenge. Its evidence requires the kind of understanding appropriate to those fields. The most honest conclusion is therefore not a slogan shouted at opponents. It is an invitation. Read the Quran seriously. Not only isolated quotations selected by supporters, not only isolated quotations selected by critics. Read complete surahs, observe how the discourse moves, study the historical setting, listen to qualified recitation while following the meaning. Learn enough Arabic to recognize what translation cannot carry. Study explanations from knowledgeable scholars. Read strong criticism rather than weak criticism. Then examine the responses. Ask whether they reproduce more than sound. Ask whether the criteria are consistent. Ask what explanation best accounts for the Quran. And perhaps most importantly, examine what you would be willing to accept as evidence. Would you recognize a successful challenge if it appeared? Would you recognize failure if the attempted answer supported your preferred conclusion? Would you recognize revelation if revelation demanded that you change? The Quran's challenge began as a response to accusation. They said that Prophet Muhammad invented it. The Quran did not answer only with outrage. It told them to bring their evidence. Produce something like it, call your supporters, gather your abilities. Seek every helper, and if the claim is true, demonstrate it. That standard reaches beyond this one debate. Do not merely claim, demonstrate. Do not merely repeat what your group believes. Understand why it believes it. Do not hide weak evidence beneath a strong voice. Do not protect faith with false stories. Do not protect disbelief with unexamined assumptions. Truth is not honored by exaggeration. Truth is honored by honesty. Humanity claimed that it could answer. Humanity produced accusations, explanations, imitations, objections, and alternative theories, but it has not produced a verified winner capable of closing the challenge for everyone. For the Muslim, the challenge remains exactly where the Quran placed it, open before humanity, impossible to complete, and pointing beyond the human voice toward revelation from Allah. For the person who does not yet believe, the challenge remains an invitation to investigate rather than a command to pretend certainty, because the deepest question is not whether someone can arrange a few similar sounds. The deepest question is what kind of book has continued to make humanity ask where it came from. You have been listening to The Guided Hour, where every journey carries a story and every story carries guidance. Until our next journey, may Allah increase us in beneficial knowledge and guide us toward what is true.